Hi everyone, today I'm going to show you how to make these watercolored vintage style Christmas cards using the present time stamp set from MFT Stamps and some Daniel Smith watercolors. So let's go ahead and start and stamp on our images. So I'm using weathered ink, distress ink to stamp my images. And the reason that I'm doing this is because the distress inks are water based, so they'll kind of fade into the background and giving me a no line color look as I paint over the images. And I like the weathered wood for this card in particular because we're going to have some really cool muted tones. In other cards, you've seen me use antique linen distress ink, and that's usually where we have a warm tones are kind of dominating the card in those instances. But here, since it's really cool colors, we're going to use the weathered wood. Okay, so to start, I'm just going to lay some water down around the area where I want my sky to be. And I'm using a squirrel hair brush for this. It's a size 12. So I think that's the largest brush that I have. I'm using Arches cold press paper, and I've cut it down to 5.5 inches by 4.25. And I've taped it down to just make sure there's no warping, but we are going to only color inside this irregular border that I'm creating now with the edge of my paintbrush. So we're not going to color all the way out to the edge of the painter's tape. We're going to leave kind of an irregular border around our scene. And I just think that that adds to the feel of the vintage kind of style that I'm trying to create with this card. So the color palette, I showed it earlier in the video, like I think it's between the 30-second and 1.5-minute mark. So if you want to use the same colors I'm using here, just pull up that palette. This color is indigo, so we're going to have an indigo sky. And I also added a little bit of blue apatite to the center part of the scene in the sky where it's a little bit lighter. So indigo is our darkest blue, and then the blue apatite is a little bit of a medium blue shade. And I'm just going to work on our background a little bit. So I want my edges to be pretty dark. I want to make sure I get pretty close to the stamped images themselves. And then we're going to work on our snow on the bottom of the scene. So I'm using Moon Glow here, and I'm just using a really, really light wash of Moon Glow. And I want to be careful not to cover over the entire bottom of the scene where the snow is, because the white that we leave in is going to really add pop to the scene. So I'm trying to be careful to just color a border with that Moon Glow, and then maybe like the outline of a little trail connecting that snowman to the two trees in the background. And that is going to be about all that I'm going to do with the Moon Glow for now. And again, it's a very, very light wash there. I'm going to add a little bit more color to the sky with our indigo. And I'm just going to kind of blot it in with the tip of my paintbrush. And I'm doing this just to get a little bit of variation in color in the sky, just to give the scene interest later on when we start to put everything together with our more boldly colored images that are going to be in the front of the scene, against the backdrop. So I let it dry, and now we can go ahead and add color to our images. So it's important to let the background dry before you move on to this face, because otherwise the colors that you're coloring the images in will kind of bleed into the background and you'll lose the shape of the images. So I'm going to start with the trees. I'm using Cascade Green here, and I'm going to add a very light wash of the color to the entire tree. And then I'm just going to blot in a little bit of deeper, more concentrated color, focusing on the right side of the tree, like where I want my shadows to be. I'm just going to kind of blot it in and then just let it move around and kind of go where it wants to. I'm going to do the same with this little tree in the front. Again, just a really, really light wash of that Cascade Green. Being careful to stay inside the outline of the tree. And then I'm going to add in my more concentrated color to the right side and just kind of let it bleed out wherever it wants. This is just our first layer of color, so we are going to have a chance to add some more detail in the next stage. We're going to add our base coat of color to the little gift bag that our little snowman is holding over his head. I'm using a light wash of raw umber here. The color palette also shows sepia, so you can use sepia as well, but I thought that the raw umber would work just a little bit better. It's a little bit cooler and a little bit lighter, I feel, than the sepia. And like I did with the trees, I just added some concentrated color to one edge of our little bag here, and just I'm letting it bleed kind of where it wants to go. I'm also adding a little bit of a shadow underneath the edges of the bow. And then we'll color in the snowman's mouth. So I am using some neutral tint here. And I'm just gonna add one layer of color, and then we'll color in the buttons with some neutral tint as well. We will add another layer of color in a little bit. This is just our base coat for now. And then for the base of the tree, I'm gonna use that raw umber again. Just gonna add a light wash. Add some white space as well, just to give some interest to the tree. So it looks like there may be some ridges in the bark. And it's a really small place to work with, so you don't really have a lot of room to play around much. So that's why when I have a real small area, I will try to leave some uncolored spots in the image, like I'm doing with this scarf here as well, just leaving some little flecks of white just to add some interest to the image once it dries. For the nose, I'm using some Aussie red gold here. Any orange shade that you have will work. You can use New Gamboge, cadmium orange, any of those. And now I've let our images dry, and now I can move on to putting the second and final coat to our trees. So I'm going to take a pretty concentrated cascade green here and just apply it to the edges of the tree, and then I'm rinsing my brush off, and just with clear water I'm going to spread that color out, just going from right to left. And I'm looking to deliberately leave some white or light spots on that tree, just so that the image, there'll be some variation of color that'll just make it interesting to look at. If it was all colored in exactly in the same tone and amount, it would just look kind of flat. So to add that depth, you want to have some variations in the color between the light and the dark. And I'm just gonna blend that out a little. And now we can move up to the top of the tree. So I'm going to leave the middle of the tree for now, just because I want that bottom part of the tree to dry before I start to work around it. I'm going to use that same technique where I kind of draw in the edges of the tree, just following the Distress Ink outline with a really concentrated layer of the Cascade Green. And then I dip my brush in water, and I'm just going to pull the color out with clean water. So that is the trick here. You don't want to apply more color. You just want to drag out whatever color it is that you laid down in your first pass when you were kind of drawing over the outline of the tree. And now we can move on to the mid-center. So my bottom tree is still pretty wet, so to get around that, I'm going to make sure that I leave a little bit of a border between where I'm adding color and where the bottom is. So if you can see that there's like a little bit of a ridge right on top of the tree branches in the center, but that's also going to help us give like a little bit of interest to the image, because we'll have some white areas on the tree, maybe look like a little highlight. I'm going to deepen up the shadows on the right side of the tree with some more concentrated color there. Take some color away on this left side just by adding some clear water. And then we can move on to our little tree, and we're going to color it the exact same way that we did for the larger tree. So I'm just going to add really concentrated color to the outline, and then I'm going to pull it out with just some clear water, a clean brush and some clear water. And then I'm going to add a little bit more concentrated color on the right just to leave a little shadow. And I'm going to leave that right side pretty light. And if it gets too dark, I'll just pick up the watercolor with my with my brush and some water. We're going to do the same here. So again, I'm just going to trace over the outline of the image with some very concentrated Cascade green, clean my brush, and then pull that color out. This is a really, really fun technique to do because you don't really have to think that much. You just kind of, you just follow the outline and you pull it out until it gets lighter. We're going to do the same thing for our little bag here. So I'm adding a concentrated layer of sepia, and I'm going to focus that on the bottom or the underside of the bag. And then I'm just going to pull that color out with some clear water. And I'm being careful here. I want to leave a really bright highlight in the center of the bag. So I'm probably going to end up leaving that little spot in the center dry, just so that there's a really, really nice contrast between the dark brown of the raw umber. I'm only using raw umber here. I don't know if I said sepia or not, but if I did, I meant raw umber. But either of them honestly will work fine. And then I'm just going to deepen up these shadows underneath the ribbon and underneath the bag with just some more sepia. For the top of the bag, we're going to do the same technique, just outline the edges and then just pull it out very slightly with some water. You have a real small area to work in, so you need to be careful there. And then for the trees, we're just going to add a couple little scribbles of that more concentrated raw umber. For the snowman, now this is fun. So we're going to use Moon Glow to shade in our little snowman. So I'm going to take a line of concentrated Moon Glow along the edge of the snowman and then just pull it out with some water. I'm going to do the same on the left side of his body. Just pull all that out. And for the snowman, I want to make sure that I leave a pretty big swath of his snow flesh, or whatever you want to call that, white, just so that he kind of pops out against the background. So here I went a little too dark, so I'm just going to pick it up with a little paper towel. It's that easy. You could either, if you have like a big splotch that you get, you could pick it up with a paper towel. If it's a little splotch, you can just pick it up with your brush with some clear water. So either of those techniques work. And then we're going to work on little snowman's head. And I want some light shading here, so I'm just going to be real careful in pulling that color out, just so that there's just a little bit like under the chin and then on the right side of the head. And then just a tiny, tiny bit of shadow right underneath the scarf there, just with a really, really light wash of the Moon Glow. And now we're going to add the shadow underneath our snowman. So we're going to use Moon Glow for all the shadows that we're going to add to the base of our images. So I start with a pretty concentrated layer, and then I pull it out just with some clear water, just so it kind of fades into a little bit of the nothingness of the background. And then whenever I feel that I have a little too much color, I just kind of pick it up with my paper towel. The only spot that I really had that issue was with the snowman. Now we're going to add the ribbon to our present package. I'm just going to use some red here. I think this is red. Alizarin crimson, I think is how you say it. And again, I'm being careful to leave some white where the bow is, just so that the color, so it looks like there's some highlights there, and to make sure the color doesn't look flat. I'm going to add another layer of color to the scarf. For the scarf, I'm using Rose of Ultramarine. I didn't put that in the palette because I don't think it's one of the key colors to this painting. I think you can use any color that you like for the scarf. You could maybe give the snowman a turquoise scarf, or maybe a blue scarf, or any color really. I just use the Rose of Ultramarine there. Now I'm going to add some shadows underneath our trees, and I'm using the Moon Glow, using the same technique that I did for our little snowman. I'm just going to pull the shadows out with some clear water. And then we'll add a little bit more of the neutral tint to the buttons there and then to the mouth as well, just to deepen up that color a little bit. And then we'll add a little bit more color right underneath the snowman because it looked like he was floating a little bit. So I just want to make sure that he's firmly grounded in the scene as are the trees in the back there. And now for the eyes, I'm just going to use some neutral tint here and just color in the eyes. You can also use a black gel pen if you like, if you feel more comfortable with that. It could be a little scary drawn on such a small little dot with a paintbrush, but the squirrel paintbrushes have really, really pointy tips, so I like them for that reason. If you need to get into a hard to hit area, you can. Now we're going to add snow to the background of the scene, and I'm using some white gouache here. I mixed with a little bit of water, and I'm just going to spatter it on with my paintbrush to get those tiny little flecks of snow. And we also want some larger flecks, so I'm just going to paint them on directly with my paintbrush. I think this is a number 2 here that I'm using, and I'm going to add the paint right on top of the images as well, so that the images look like they are in the middle of the snowstorm as well. If we just put the snow all around the images, then it'll look like the snow is behind the images, like off in the distance. But we want to give the effect that our little snowman is in the middle of a big blizzard. So we're going to put snow all over him, all over the package, and all over the trees as well. And we're using different sizes of snow as well, because snow comes down in big flakes, it comes down in small flakes, and it also depends on how far away the snow is from you. So snow that's closer will appear to be bigger flakes, and then that snow all the way in the background will be those tiny little flakes. And you just keep adding the snow until you feel like it has the effect you're looking for. And then we're going to just color in his little arms. I had forgotten to do this earlier, so we'll just do that here. I'm just taking my neutral tint and a really thin paintbrush, and I'm just going to draw in the little arms by just coloring over the stamped image where we stamped it with the distress ink earlier. And just a little bit more spatter of snow. And then I'm going to let this dry completely before I move on to the next step. And then once it's dry, we can remove the painter's tape. And I just love that irregular border for this card. I think that it really helps to add to the vintage feel of this card with those soft, muted, cool colors, and then our irregular border and our happy little snowman in the middle. We then will stamp our sentiment. So this sentiment says it's present time. And there are some other versions as well. If you use the present time stamp set, this is another version where it says don't peek, well, maybe a little. And that is it. So those are our vintage style Christmas cards that we watercolored up today, everyone. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope you give these cards a try. It's a lot of fun. This is also a great project to mass produce, because instead of heat drying your images in between layers, you can just work on multiple cards at the same time and kind of make multiple cards at once that way. Okay, have a great day, and I will see you again soon in another video.